So we had a whole bunch of Transformers Beast Alliance news that we have to get into, but I'm not going to cover too much of that because a lot of it is, needless to say, everyone's read the different message boards and saw some of the stuff that I posted on Twitter too. I don't want to get too deep into it. It'll be stuff that we'll cover at a later date. There's only so much that could really be publicly said without people getting in trouble. So when that stuff becomes more, I guess, openly shot, and then people from the streets of Montreal could see it and they could leak it also, then I'll feel more comfortable talking about it. But we'll get into that in a moment. For now, we're going to do a Patreon listener question. I have a whole bunch of them in the queue, and I figured I'll tackle a bunch of them now. And there's a lot of really good ones and conversations and discussions that could come from that. People that don't know, we got a Patreon. If you want to check it out, patreon.com/protoman. We got a cool bunch of extra bonuses if you join the Patreon. Of course, you know, the Discord, the end credit segment scroll, get your name in there, gift box in the mail, a whole bunch of cool stuff, deals. But more importantly, let's do a Patreon listener question. We got a Patreon listener question from T-Formers 2002. And he asks here, hey, Proto, I got a question for you. With Hasbro and Takara's recent War for Cybertron Studio Series 86 toy lines and their aim to make figures that are more Generation 1 accurate in terms of show accuracy, and people throwing them around in terms of mini masterpieces, and he uses air quotes here, at a somewhat cheaper price, where do you think toys would have been if we got stuff like Earthrise Optimus Prime, the leader class, coming out in 2006 to 2010? For example, instead of Classic's 2006 Voyager Optimus Prime, we got the Earthrise Optimus Prime. How would have they improved on that going into the modern era? Always love your podcast. Keep up the great work. T-Formers 2002. Thank you for the question, T-Formers, and thank you for the kind words. Well, the sad thing is they wouldn't have done that. And this is something that has been prevalent in Transformers, I want to say, around the time of Energon, and even a little bit in Armada, which is the rule of thumb. And I'll get into like the deeper part of it afterwards, but the rule of thumb used to be back in the day even is if you have a mold, right? You do a mold of a character, and if it makes sense for that mold to be a certain color, that would be the best way to sell it. You don't release it that way. So give an example. Armor Hide from Cybertron, 2005, 2006, the Armor Hide mold. You look at that mold, if it was like in a grayscale prototype kind of thing, and you'd be like, oh, well, you got to do that in Huffer orange colors. But you don't do that. You do it in blue, you do it in black, you do it in any color but the Huffer colors. Why? Because when the mold comes out first, people are going to buy it because it's a brand new mold. And then when you release it in the colors that people really want to have it in, you made a second sale. Heck, you might even have made a third sale because also customizers probably would have bought extra armor hinds to paint them orange. And then when the official release comes out, in this case it was a BotCon release unfortunately, but when the official release comes out, then on top of it all, they're going to buy that other one too. So you ended up making 2-3 sales from a single mold, where if you would have released that orange version first, people might not buy the black repaint, the gray repaint, the brown repaint. So it's always kind of smarter to do that. Now, obviously, in recent years, they figured out a different way to do it, where they'll release it in the proper colors, a Huffer in orange, or you will, but then they'll do like a slightly tweaked, better version later. We saw that with the movie stuff in 2007 with the premium colors, where you would have just basic one, and then they'll do better, more show accurate / movie accurate color schemes of the exact same mold. Sometimes even the same price. They didn't even increase the MSRP, and you ended up buying 2 Bumblebees or 2 Jazzes or 2 whatever, 2 Ironhides. And that was just a common practice. Now, what does that have to do with your question? Would they have released like Earthrise Optimus Prime first and how things would have changed? They wouldn't have. The plan always is to never give everyone everything right away. If they would have done that back in 2006, think about that. We're talking 15 years ago. If they would have done that, no joke, they would have had nothing for the next 15 years of the classics, universe, generations, reveal the shield, hunt for Decepticons, whatever you want to call the line at this point, War for Cybertron and moving forward. They would have had nothing. If they, you have to literally give them a little bit every single time. The masterpieces are a different story. They're a Japanese market, non-retail product that is expensive, and they've made it even more expensive than what it used to be. The days of, MPO1 20th anniversary Optimus Prime being between $69 and $100 today is $300. Those days are long gone. So we're in a world today where you have to literally give them not the best product, but just enough so that when we do that character again in 4 years for a trademark refresh and everything like that, you're going to buy it again. And I mean, as someone who's obsessed over the perfection of hot rod figures, I've seen that firsthand. You have first like the Classics one in 2006, and it's like, wow, that thing's great. And then you get better repaints of that mold, whether it be the Henkei one or the Battle in Space 2-pack, you get like better repaints of it. So maybe that's the better version. So now there's 2 more sales that are done. And then the MPO9 Masterpiece comes out, and you go, oh, well, that's clearly going to be the best hot rod toy ever, even though it had its little issues here and there because of it being a Rodimus toy at the same time. So maybe that's the better version. And then you got the MP28 hot rod that came out, and then you go, oh, well, clearly that's the best hot rod now, right? And then you have now the Studio Series 86, and we're going to go, oh, maybe that's the best hot rod. But you know what's crazy? It's probably not. Something's going to be tweaked, something's going to be twisted, and in 4 to 5 years from now, maybe 6 years, maybe 7, something better will come around. And that's the reality, is you never give them everything, because that way they will always, if they're satisfied back in 2006, then you've lost 15 years of product that you could have sold to them. And that's why so many times people go like, why isn't this being released? Why? You have to pace it. And look at the Optimus Prime, to give an example. If we got Earthrise Optimus Prime leader class back in 2006, that would have been done. It would have been done. Like, where do you go from there? Like all the times that they've been releasing Optimus Prime toys within the Classics line after that. Heck, like just the following year in 2007, they did I think it was called the Battle Begins 2-pack, which had that very G1-esque kind of Optimus Prime with the green tank Megatron, and came with a DVD for the Classics line. Like, imagine if that would have came out after the Earthrise Optimus Prime was released in 2006. No one would have bought it. They would have thought it's this stupid deluxe scale with a punch gimmick thing. Like, what do I need that for? They lost a sale. But many people bought that 2-pack because they felt that was a better Generation 1 Optimus Prime representation. Obviously, many better ones would come afterwards, and a lot of people, they might have, nostalgia and enjoyment for that original Classics one. But at the end of the day, like, there was a constant evolution to give another Optimus Prime and a better version, on and on. Look at people who bought the different Siege ones and everything, thinking, oh, that's going to be the best one. And then the different repaints of that Siege mold that were slightly more show accurate every time. People who bought masterpieces, people who bought third-party ones, people who bought all kinds of different, like, smaller scale stuff and larger scale stuff. All the sales that would have been lost if they just gave everyone what they wanted the first time around. It's sad. It's a little scummy. But it's also how the business works, is that you can't just do that. And that dates all the way back to just the repaint potentials and how you just avoided the best stuff first because you could make more sales later. And it still exists to this day. I still feel that a lot of times when we get certain figures and we go, you know what, it's great, but if they would have done this and they would have done that, it would have been perfect. And it's like, yeah, you're right. And that day will come. In relation to what you said, you also made a mention of mini masterpieces. Mini masterpieces are actually more a result of what happens is Hasbro and Takara, when they design their masterpiece Transformers, there's more of an open-ended budget with a lot of those. Obviously, it's not a completely open-ended budget where it's like whatever it costs, that's what it'll cost. But you have, like, a good example I always say is Beast Wars Dinobot, where that was a figure and a design that kind of had a rough evolution. Like when you look at the Universe 2.0 Dinobot and how not a lot of people were really a big fan of that. And then we had the Henkei repaint, which a lot of people were like, oh, well, that's clearly the best version. And for the longest time, it really was. Which, again, 2 sales were made because people bought that Dinobot, then they bought the Henkei repaint, which had a more show-accurate color scheme and just looked much nicer. And that was the Dinobot for years. Literally was for years and years and years, outside of like obviously some like, 10th anniversary repaints of the original 1995 mold, which I wouldn't really count. But you fast forward to then the masterpiece being released, and they were able to put all this time and money and engineering to really figure out how to make a really good Dinobot toy. And then after that toy gets released and it makes its money, 2-3 years later, they go, you know what? Let's take what we learned from this, because now we had the time, the money, and the budget to figure it out, and let's try to reverse engineer it. Obviously, you can't use every turn and twist of a masterpiece and the parts numbers and the paint deco rollout, but it's there. And you could try to make a more, I guess we'll call it a budget version of it, and thus the mini masterpieces are born, and we have Kingdom, Voyager class, Beast Wars Dinobot. And there's a lot of examples of that. The first example I could ever think of is Masterpiece MPO-1 Optimus comes out, and then literally the following year, we had Robot Masters, which was this cute little Transformers subline at the time from Japan. We had Robot Masters Optimus Prime, which came out, I think it was 2003 or 2004, which when you look at that toy, you clearly see that the engineering ideas and cues from that huge masterpiece, which towered over it at 12 inches, as opposed to that Robot Master one, which was like a 4 to 5 inch figure at best. It showed how much they were able to crunch in from what they learned from a large, expensive product. So there's a lot. It's an interesting journey, but I do believe that it would have never happened. But let's say it did. Let's say we did get it. I think they're one of two things. Number one, they would have really hurt themselves for long-term sales of those classic characters, and it may be in that alternate timeline, if you will. It would have then forced them to then have to do original stuff, if anything, which is, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's kind of great when you think about it then, because we would have gotten everything that we wanted back then, assuming the engineering was even there. The ideas and engineering weren't even there back then, but we would have got it back then. Chances are back then too, but the way that plastic costs were and price points and everything, it would have been cheaper and better quality, probably more decos too, because it's very different how things are today in terms of, I guess, the budget and the limitations of it compared to back in 2006. And we probably would live in an era today where we'd have more originality because they got all that stuff out of their system. But unfortunately, the corporate side of it survived instead of the timeline that we're speculating today. And there's still much more to come. We're still one day going to get our perfect Bumblebee or our perfect this, because we still haven't gotten it yet. We're almost there. We just didn't get it yet. And sooner or later, all of those will become a reality. It really will. It's just they're waiting for that time. I look at the Walmart exclusive Netflix Bumblebee, and I see that mustard colored orange that they put on it. That's like, we could call it an orangey yellow. And I look at that and go, they did that on purpose because they know everyone's going to go crazy to buy that Netflix War for Cybertron Deluxe Bumblebee, and then give it 2 years, 3 years, and they'll give it the proper, vibrant colored yellow from the 1984 cartoon. And then they'll make another sale. And then the people who went crazy to buy that first one will buy this one too. The people who weren't able to get that one will get this one also. And they get mileage out of the mold, and everyone's happy in terms of the business side of Hasbro, investors, and the quarterly reports and everything like that. So I hope that answers your question. It's kind of a bit of a downer answer, but it really is the reality of how the business of Hasbro works and Takara, and pretty much stretching the molds. You have to understand, Transformer toys have a lot more parts numbers and a lot more time to engineer and put together than that of your average Star Wars or Marvel figure. Most, look, I love Marvel Legends, but a lot of those molds are shared among those characters over spans of, God, some of the body designs are stuff that are now a decade old for some of those, and they've really saved a lot on engineering and stuff, as opposed to Transformers that everything has to be made from scratch. It has to be engineered, it has to be planned out, safety tested, stress tested, all kinds of stuff. It's an expensive kind of toy to put together when you really think about it, and time consuming. So they try to get every buck that they could squeeze out of a mold. They will always try to do. And on the flip side of that, it's the same thing. Why give everyone everything at the beginning when you can make more money in the long run, slowly dropping it out? And it's kind of the reality of all business, not just Transformers. But thanks again for the question, T-Formers 2002. And if you want to be like T-Formers 2002 and join the Patreon, ask a listener question, or just hang out in the Discord and come join us, patreon.com/Protoman. Check the pinned description or in the comments below. It'll be there. Come join us, patreon.com/Protoman, and rock out here on the podcast.